Hey guys, this is the Darkened Rose, and I just want to make sure that this is quick so that you guys can get into the narration, but I feel that's not going to be quick anyways. But I just want to give you guys an apology for this narration. And before everyone starts freaking out, the narration itself isn't bad. It's more in terms of the audio quality of it. The narrating itself, I feel, is the best part of all this, which it should be. But I feel like the audio quality also makes that part suffer a bit. So I decided to use a new microphone that I obtained from a friend of mine. He's part of the audio industry, and he let me have the microphone that I used to record with for this narration. What I should have done instead of just actually do the recording instead was just do a sample recording, like a test recording, like say test 1 2 3 or something, and then check it out, see how it sounds, and then go through with the recording. Sorry if I'm stumbling, by the way. It's 4 a.m. I'm very tired. But I didn't do that. Instead, I just did the recording, and that was that. And I feel that that was the worst mistake that I ever could have made in terms of just doing recordings at all. And the reason why I think that way is because this narration has got to be one of the most special fanfic narrations that I'm ever going to do. Because this fanfic, Stockholm Syndrome by BlackenedHearts, is the very first, one of the very first fanfics that I ever read in the RWBY fandom. And one of the biggest inspirations to getting me into writing RWBY fanfiction. So this was a pretty big deal to me. But my stupid self made a mistake that he never should have had. And I feel that the quality of the narration suffers because of it. The audio quality isn't garbage, I'll say. But it's not acceptable to my standards. Usually whenever I do a narration, I use the Blue Yeti to record the narration. I use the Blue Yeti for everything. Just this one occasion, I wanted to try out the new microphone to see how it sounds. But I should have actually just done a test recording instead of just do the narration. So I apologize so much for my mistakes. I feel like no matter the apology, I feel like you guys will still be upset over it. So to assure you guys more, I won't be using that microphone at all anymore. Actually, I'm going to sell it off because it's actually quite an expensive microphone, and what I should do instead is just sell it off and use the money that I get from it to purchase more sophisticated audio equipment. So that's pretty much what I'm planning to do. So until it gets sold off and until I get the money, I'm going to keep using my Blue Yeti for the narrations. But I hope you guys still enjoyed the narration despite the drop in audio quality. Really, I poured my heart and soul into this. It's a re-experience of one of my biggest inspirations, because I haven't read this story in about more than 3 years. So yeah, it's a hell of an experience to go through again. Anyways, I'll leave you guys to it. Sorry for taking so long, but here's the narration, you guys. And as always, stay classy. And leave your feedback about this narration in the comment section below. I always make sure to read it as soon as I can.
What's up, you guys? This is the Darkened Rose here, and well, I'm a little nerve-wracked right now because this is the first time in a long time that I'm back to doing narrations again. But I'm actually very excited about this one. So I did say I was going to put a one shot narration out during the month of May, but I just felt that just waiting until I actually got school out of the way felt much better. So today was the final day of school for me, and well, yeah, here we are. We're done. Well, I'm done with my junior year of high school, so I have one more year left, and then I'm off to being an adult or something. So here we are, and I pretty much decided on a classic fanfic in the RWBY fanfiction community, and I don't really know if people know this guy or girl. I actually don't know their gender. Sorry. Um, the author is known as BlackenedHearts, and long ago, when I first started reading fanfiction, this was the first author that I started reading fanfiction from. Um, I don't know which one I started with. I think it was actually this one that I'm narrating, but this fanfic has a lot of history with me because um, I think it was mostly because of the fact that now as I am thinking about it, because I actually started a story a few months ago that has the pairing that this story goes by. Or I don't know if the pairing in the story actually happens at all. I think it's actually hinted at, but that's about it. But I really like this story because it was such a long length one shot, and it was just so strange of a concept to think about with the RWBY characters. And this was even before the show started, I think. August 29th. I think it barely started by then. So here we are. If you the link is always in the description if you want to read along, or it's somewhere right here, the link to the fanfic. But we're going to be reading Stockholm Syndrome by BlackenedHearts. And oh, I forgot to mention something. I actually have a new microphone, and I want your input on it. I've been hearing from my Twitch streams that it's a bit on the low end in terms of how it makes me sound. So I'm trying to move away just a little bit from it so that the low end doesn't hit so much. So here we are. Let's get down to reading this. I'm excited to read again and nervous at the same time. And this is a pretty long one shot. So yeah. All right. Stockholm Syndrome by BlackenedHearts. Let me actually read the Wikipedia definition because BlackenedHearts actually put it down here. Stockholm Syndrome, or capture bonding, is a psychological phenomenon in which hostages express empathy and sympathy and have positive feelings towards their captors, sometimes to the point of defending them. These feelings are generally considered irrational in light of the danger or risk endured by the victims, who essentially mistake a lack of abuse from their captors for an act of kindness. I remember when I first read that was some pretty heavy shit, in my opinion, because I never heard of Stockholm Syndrome until right then and there. I was only, 2013, so yeah, I was only 13 at the time. This was, like, very early RWBY fanfic stuff, so yeah, you can see why it's got a lot of history with me. This was actually a couple days, no, not a couple days, I think it was August 29th was when it came out, so September the 5th is when I started writing, when I first put out my first story ever. So it wasn't that long ago. So yeah, this story has a lot of history with me. All right, let's begin. It was all Adam's idea. While Blake did not entirely agree with the plan, she chose not to voice her dissenting opinion. Not that it would have mattered, as the rest of their organization was also in support of the operation. In a surprise strike, they managed to render the girl unconscious and abduct her with nobody the wiser. The girl in question was Wai Shni, the heiress of the Shni Dust Company. A very powerful company, but no company gets that big without some dirty dealings and unsavory practices. It was inevitable that they would make enemies, and now the heiress would be the one to suffer for it unless their demands were met. I barely realized that I should change some things on this. because I haven't been on fanfiction.net in ages. So my preset with my font and the dark mode, it didn't save. Oh, this is much better. I'm kind of a little blind without glasses. Though I am nearsighted, so it's fine. I have to take out my glasses when I'm at the computer. At the moment, the girl in question was lying unconscious in the cell they had prepared for her. The conditions were not terrible as far as cells went. It had basic amenities: a bed, a toilet, and a sink. The most important thing, however, were the chains and cuffs. She was an aspiring huntress. It would be best not to give her even the possibility of escape. There was little in the room other than those few things. It wouldn't do to give her any possible weapons or hiding places. The heiress's own personal weapon was left behind at the scene with a message attached informing them of what happened to the girl and what their demands were. Another small and darkened intermediary room between the cell and the rest of the building also existed. A two-way mirror was installed between this room and the cell as an extra precaution to ensure that they could see her before they stepped foot inside. Obviously, many precautions were already in place, but nevertheless, it was deemed best for someone to keep watch over the prisoner personally. Blake had been selected for the duty, and starting tomorrow, she would have to be watching over the prisoner. For now, though, she still had other business to finish with. The new heiress was still unconscious, so she could still be left alone for now. Blake gave one last look at the sleeping girl. So pristine and perfect. She was probably born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Oh, I remember that mistake. Silver spoon in her mouth. It was regrettable that when she woke up, she will have found out that she was ripped away from her cushy life and put into the situation. If everything went well, though, it shouldn't be too long before she got back to it. So in the end, it mattered little. Just a small taste of what life had to offer outside her undoubtedly sheltered lifestyle. Or was it? This is also a really cool thing about this story. The next part is actually a perspective change. And I remember seeing that and I was like, holy shit, that's pretty cool that someone did that. Also, I'm thankful there was water nearby. I should have drank water before this, but I'm never prepared. You all know that. I'm not prepared. It's a little weird. Weiss awoke and was instantly hit with the feeling that something was wrong. Her last memories were of a sharp stab of pain in the neck before everything went black. Her eyes were still closed, but there seemed to be a dim light visible through her eyelids wherever she was. She seemed to be lying on a particularly uncomfortable bed, and she could feel something cold and heavy on each of her limbs. She attempted to raise one of her hands to her neck, but froze when she heard the jangling of metal chains and a tug on her other hand. Slowly she opened her eyes, fearing the worst. Weiss looked down upon herself, and her stomach dropped as a number of her fears were confirmed. A pair of manacles were around her wrists, a short chain linking the two together, allowing for only limited movement. A similar arrangement was also present around her ankles, albeit with the chain between those slightly longer. Each of the pairs of manacles also had a separate chain, which appeared to connect to the metal posts of the bed, keeping her here in this room. A small relief, however, was that at least she was still clothed in her dress. But her boots and accessories, such as her hair ornament and jewelry, were gone, as was Murnaster, obviously. Suppressing the initial feelings of panic, Weiss looked around the room to try and get her bearings, to find anything that could help her in her situation. Unfortunately, there was nothing of use. Basic things for hygiene, such as a toilet and sink, were next to her bed, and there appeared to be a mirror on the far wall next to the door, as well as a light switch. Eyeing the lengths of chain connecting her to the bed, while she may be able to reach the first two given their close proximity, she probably would not be able to reach the third of the room the door was on, and the room was not very large to begin with. Her movements were quite limited. The sink and toilet appeared to be quite sturdy as well, metal rather than porcelain. Nothing she could have broken. Perhaps to use a piece of porcelain as an improvised weapon or tool of some sort. The rest of the room itself was rather barren and Spartan, concrete floors and walls. Wait, Spartan? I actually never realized that. I don't know if that's a mistake or not. Or hold on, you know what? That's actually a really good question. What does Spartan mean other than Halo Spartan? showing the indifference to comfort or luxury traditionally associated with ancient Sparta. And then the adjective, relating to Sparta in ancient Greece, a citizen of Sparta. Okay, so I'm guessing that was actually an incorrection. It wouldn't be better if it were like desolate instead of Spartan, or whatever it was supposed to be. Gingerly, she eased herself out of the bed, with the sound of jangling chains following her. She could feel the weight of the manacles and the chains. They were rather cumbersome, presumably to prevent any sudden movements on her part. Weiss winced as she felt the cold concrete beneath her bare feet. Her body felt a little stiff, but overall her movements seemed unimpeded other than for the chains. She took some time inspecting her surroundings a bit more closely, but there was nothing that she did not find. There was nothing that she did not find anything that she hadn't already seen in her initial visual inspection. She would not be able to escape given what resources she had available to her. There was no course of action other than to wait until her captors made themselves known. Gritting her teeth and clenching her fists, Weiss made her way back to the bed. Sitting on top of it, she pulled her legs close and lowered her head. With her arms wrapped around her legs and her face resting on her head, she waited. Without any sort of reference to time in the room, Weiss couldn't be sure how long she had been waiting for. It felt like a couple of hours at least, where she was left to her own thoughts about what might happen to her. She tried to keep a hold on her emotions, to try and stay calm, but it was hard. Knocked unconscious, abducted, and woken and chained to a bed without any weapons available to her, Weiss's thoughts turned towards the worst about what might happen to her. She really had to hand it to him. Being left to stew in the fears conjured up by her own imagination was a smart first move. Eventually, though, she heard the sound of the door opening as a man's voice spoke up. "I see you are awake." Weiss's head whipped up at the first sign of anything different from the monotony of the silent room. The door was open a crack, revealing only the darkened outline of a shaded figure behind it. "You!" she hissed, straining her eyes in an attempt to make out his features. Her expression was practically murderous. "Who are you? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Of course I know who you are, Miss Schnee. Would we have gone to this much trouble if we did not?" The darkened figure answered condescendingly. "Your family and its company has made many enemies over the years. Is it really so surprising that they would eventually strike back?" As he spoke, the man entered the room, stepping out of the shadows of the observation room behind him. He was dressed rather cleanly in an obviously custom-tailored crisp black suit with stylized red designs on it. The most curious thing about his attire was a strange red and white mask covering his eyes. However, despite how eye-catching his manner of dress was, none of these things were what had caught Weiss's focus. God damn it, I was so perfect for a while. Her eyes flickered upward and narrowed at two darker colored objects nestled amongst his stylized red hair. Her mind came to a conclusion as she whispered to herself. "You are..." "Yes," he smirked sardonically, cutting her off. "Yes, I am. You do not seem surprised. Of course, you should have been expecting some form of retaliation from our kind one day, given your company's practices." Weiss pressed her lips together into a narrow line. "I am merely the heiress. I have no influence over company policies." She looked down once more at her chains before returning her eyes to the man before her. She would not be able to reach him at that distance. She was still angry, but being fully aware of her current position, she knew that she was in no state to be lashing out. She would have to keep control over her emotions. "Responsible or not, you do not seem to deny these company practices either," the man pointed out. "No matter." He waved dismissively. "It matters not whether you are at fault or not, only that you hold some importance to the company." There is to be no reasoning with you then, is there?" Weiss asked rhetorically. She could see where this was going. A pair of blue eyes cast another quick glance around the room. "Judging them by my accommodations as well as your words, I am to be some kind of hostage." A mocking clap answered her as well as a short chuckle. "You catch on quick." "Good." He turned around once more, stepping into the darkness of the other room. "I hope you enjoy your stay, Erishni. Have a good night." Moving his arm to the side, he turned off most of the lights in the room, leaving only one dull bulb near the exit on. With that, he closed the door behind him, retreating into the shadows. Weiss was left alone once more. Alone she waited, without any company but herself and her own thoughts. There was nothing for her to do, nothing to interrupt the quiet. Nothing to interrupt the quiet other than her own mind and movements. She stood a few times, pacing the short distances in her cell the chains allowed her. After removing her boots, she also spent time sitting or laying on the bed constantly, shifting from position to position. In the hours spent, nothing changed in that time. She wasn't quite sure what she was waiting for. Rescue, or for her captor to show himself again. Either way, she didn't get it. As more and more hours passed, the reality of her situation began to sink in. Eventually, she fell asleep, wondering what was to become of her. Man, just reading this again, it feels really great. I really am enjoying this again. I haven't read this story in 2 years, 3 years. So it's been an awful long time since I last read it. How the years go by. Take another swig of water. Oh. I hope you guys are doing well, by the way. It's been a long time since I've said something like that. Other than the update vlogs I've been doing. Oh, my eyes. My eyes. It was the next day when Blake found herself watching over their prisoner. After Adam had left following a short chat with the heiress, she had evidently fallen asleep sometime in the night. Granted, that was likely to be a given since there was not much else she could do. Well, she could have done in there. Fuck. She was still asleep by the time that Blake had arrived in the morning to take position as guard, since Adam was no longer in the hideout, having went out to take care of business. Blake was now seated in a chair by the door, out of reach from the prisoner. She had brought a book to help pass the time, as her captive certainly wasn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. This arrangement wasn't too bad, she supposed. With the heiress restrained, it wouldn't take much concentration to keep an eye on her. Now she finally had the time to catch up on her reading. Blake the bookworm, everyone. Eventually, though, she noticed that Weiss had awoken and was now staring at her. Just those beady eyes. That just reminded me of Infamous Second Son. Aunt Betty. You're not one of those beady-eyed bioterrorists that go around killing people hickly-pickly. Seeing, though, that Weiss made no motion to get out of bed, she chose not to take any action either other than a slight inclination of her head in acknowledgement of the other girl's presence. The two continued in silence for some time, the only noise in the room being the soft flutter of pages in Blake's book each time she turned a page. In that time, Blake watched the prisoner from the corner of her eye. Although she had yet to see her actually do anything, a number of subtle expressions played out both in Weiss's expressions as well as through her body language. It was quite clear that she was obviously displeased with her current situation. Both anger or perhaps a tad bit of fear featured prominently on her face. Eventually, though, she seemingly managed to rein herself in and calm down. About a half hour had passed before the silence was broken. Possibly less as the reading girl was not particularly paying attention to the time. "So what's your story?" Weiss asked. "You do not seem to be one of them." Blake paused for a moment in the middle of reading her book. Looking up, her amber eyes locked onto Weiss's own cool blue gaze as the white-haired girl's eyes narrowed in scrutiny at the odd color. "And what is it to you that what my story is?" Blake replied coolly. Still in the midst of scanning Blake's features for something, Weiss answered dryly. "I'm being held here captive against my will. Humor me." Blinking slowly, Blake continued staring steadily at her for another moment of silence. "Half," was her eventual monosyllabic response. Feeling that the conversation was finished, Blake turned back to her book. The captured heiress, however, did not seem so satisfied with that response, nor did she share Blake's sentiment about the end of the conversation. "Half? What do you mean by half?" she questioned, somewhat annoyed at the vague answer. As a prisoner, she did not exactly have anything else to occupy her time with, so Blake supposed that she was unlikely to just let this conversation end so unsatisfactorily for her. half fauna, came Blake's clarification. Oh shit! I remember what this era of RWBY was. Hold on, let me finish this. Her soft voice managing to carry across the room easily enough. So, I remember the questions people had. I remember what people called faunus first before, calling them faunus fully. Nor did they. Yeah, and they did say half at times. But I don't think there is such thing as half faunus. No, there's only faunus. Yeah, I remember. I used to call it fauna too. And then we started getting a better picture of it during the... I don't know if it was the... I think it was the first volume that they kind of answered things a bit better for us. Oh, man. Just worried for volume 5, just thinking about this. That's what I am. Half. She did not look up from her book. Weiss was a little surprised at this information. I couldn't tell at all. You didn't have any distinguishing features distinguishing features that would indicate as such other than perhaps your eyes. Cocking her head to the side inquisitively, the captive girl apparently felt the need to question her further. You could pass for human easily enough. Something such as this shouldn't be necessary for you. Pursing her lips in annoyance, Blake's response came faster this time with a bit of a bite to it. It shouldn't be necessary to have to hide my nature. What things should be like is not the same as what things are, Weiss said, seemingly rather annoyed herself. She was apparently displeased with the half-fauna's previous statement. It would be easier to just live your life as a regular human. Why go to such extremes such as this? It was at this point that Blake's expression hardened, with her voice growing cold. I don't know you nearly well enough to tell you my reasons behind my actions, prisoner. Returning her attention to the book, the conversation was quite definitively ended this time. Said prisoner was not particularly happy with this end of the conversation, if the frown on her face was anything to go by. Still, though, she did not say anything, sensing that she likely would not be getting any more with the other girl in this agitated state. The two lapsed into silence. Awaking the next, Weiss found herself alone for the moment, her guard from yesterday not present for the moment. While having a guard watching over her made any attempts at escape impossible, the possibility was already close enough to impossible anyway with the resources available to her. So it really made very little difference in the end. So at least having some company was better than none, provided the guard was at least tolerable. When she had first seen that her guard was also female, although she had tried not to let it show, she was actually quite relieved. Being chained to a bed after being kidnapped and held captive did not lend itself to more comforting thoughts. It was extremely tempting for her to snark and sass at her captors, making as much of a nuisance herself as possible. However, she was also not stupid enough to mouth off and unnecessarily antagonize the people who had her chained down and at their mercies. Yesterday's guard also seemed calm enough. There was no reason to give her a reason to be replaced with somebody worse. There was not much of a chance for her to escape by herself. She had best wait until her father negotiated her release and someone came for her. Sorry. Oh, Jesus. Ooh. Oh, Weiss's father, am I right? What a dickbag. She knew that she should hate the other girl for being part of whatever group responsible for her capture, and indeed she harbored quite a bit of resentment. However, having her here was better than not having her here, so she tried to restrain any petty or spiteful impulses that acted out against her. The main reason why she did not particularly mind having a guard was that, quite frankly, it was boring being alone in her cell. I thought I heard something. Although they had not spoken much outside that short initial conversation, having somebody else around was at least slightly more interesting than the stillness of an empty room, even if the other girl had not looked up much from her book. She just now realized that she had never actually gotten her name. A half-fauna, that was what she said she was. Weiss simply did not understand the other girl. She showed no signs of her inhuman heritage to her appearance. Yet she still seemed to embrace that part of her which must make life so difficult for her. Fauna were not treated well in their society, not with the story, stigma, and superstition surrounding them. They were second-class citizens at best, and the Schneedust Company took advantage of that. Closing her eyes, Weiss let out a sigh. She had not been lying when she said that as an heiress, she had no real power over the company's workings. She was not a fan of the treatment of the fauna, but there was nothing she could do to change it, and now the company's policies were coming back to bite her. How unfortunate. Her thoughts drifted once more to the dark-haired girl of yesterday. She could hide the fact that she was a fauna easily enough and just live her life as a human. It would certainly go a long way in making life easier for her. There was no reason why she should have to associate herself with groups such as these apparent fauna extremists. She simply did not make any sense to her. Oh, fuck. Any further interactions they had after the short conversation were mostly limited to when the raven-haired girl brought her meals in. Just 2 meals, presumably lunch and dinner from the food. A third meal was hardly necessary since she wasn't expending much energy just sitting here. The food was actually surprisingly good, given that she was a prisoner, but it seemed that the other girl ate the same meals as her as well, so perhaps that was to be expected. Oh, God. There's something that annoys me when I was in my nose. And the fact that my throat likes to dry out easily. Her eyes slowly scanned the room. The only thing different was the presence of the chair the other girl sat on. It was a simple wooden chair. If she could get to it, perhaps she would be able to break it, use the wood for something. But really, it was out of her reach. And what could she do with broken pieces of a wooden chair anyway? Certainly nothing useful. These are just idle thoughts of a mind with nothing better to do. A few frustratingly quiet hours passed before she arrived. Sweeping in through the now open door, she came carrying 2 trays of food. One was swiftly set aside atop the lone chair, and stepping forward, Weiss was silently offered the other. She took it, and the soft plastic utensils with the mother thinks, followed shortly by the other girl retreating slowly towards her seat. Simple enough food, a ham and cheese omelet with a side of sausages. Fresh enough that it meant there was probably a kitchen nearby, or it was homemade rather than ordered out from somewhere. It was cooked and tasted quite well, though, once again. Weiss wondered if the amber-eyed girl had made it herself. Still, she wasn't about to start complimenting the cooking skills of her captors. Oh, come on, why not? I would. It would certainly piss them off, probably. It'd be like, shut up! So, Weiss started, being again the first to break the silence. You have me at a bit of a You have me at a bit of a disadvantage. Obviously, you know who I am, but I do not even have a name by which I can refer you to. I can refer to you. She made a hum of acknowledgement as she considered the other girl. Oh, fuck. Once again, the other girl gave her that slow, considering gaze of hers before answering. No one heard that before. Blake. My name is Blake. She made a hum of acknowledgement as she considered the other girl. Blake's name. Not a terribly common given name, especially not for a girl, but not unheard of either. Looking at her appearance, she supposed that the name fit. Pale skin and black hair, not to mention her manner of dress. Blake was a fairly apt name for her, about as fitting as Weiss was for herself. Oh, got my nose. It's making a noise. Ugh. Hearing the flutter of pages once again, cool blue eyes flickered back to the only book in the room. That's the same book from yesterday, isn't it? You seem to read... You seem to read fast. Shouldn't you be further in than that? Weiss felt odd that she was now attempting to make small talk with her cell guard. But then again, she had nothing better to do with her time. It didn't seem like Blake would speak up of her own volition. Another pause before Amber eyes raised themselves once more from the pages of the book. I have already read this book several times before, actually. It's a favorite of mine. What's it about? She asked as she adjusted her sitting position on the bed. Blake blinked at her, probably as surprised as she was at the attempts of conversation. Still, though, it seemed that either the inquiry about the book aligned with her interest, or she was deciding to humor her as she continued speaking. It is a story of a man and a monster. Although the book is about the man, the monster is the more iconic of the two. Blake paused, looking at Weiss for a moment, as if waiting to see if she wished for her to continue. Oh, yeah. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, everyone. That is such a classic book, by the way. I definitely recommend reading it if you have not. Actually,
I kind of miss the fact. I kind of miss the personality that Blake had in Volume 1. I know Volume 4 was much more serious because now they're separated and everything, but there wasn't really much hint of anything that they had kept from the years of Beacon. And to be honest, it's actually quite weird because some of the personality things that they'd done at Beacon were something that seemed to be more of a permanent thing, something that they do as a hobby or a side thing. Like Blake reading books. But you don't see her reading. You just see her just staring out. Or doing whatever the fuck. Or holding Son in her arms as he's dying. Somebody help! Oh god, I'm an asshole. I'm sorry, guys. Fuck. Oh god. That one sentence was probably the most she had heard from the quiet girl, so Weiss quickly gestured her with her hand for the other girl to continue, causing the rigging of chains. It seemed Blake was really fond of speaking on this topic as she continued talking with no more prompting than the simple gesture. Although he was called a monster, it was originally only an appearance. In soul and nature he was created innocent, but continuously spurned by the cruelty of humanity, and of his creator, the man. His actions grew darker as he became the monster he was labeled. A short break in the explanation as Blake seemingly lost herself in her mind to the story she was recounting. In the end, though, despite giving into his rage, despite the atrocities he committed, he still despaired at his life, and found solace only in death. The quiet tone of her voice gave a rather solemn nature to her summary of the story. This time it was Weiss's turn to blink in surprise. Blake had been a rather quiet person thus far, and it was strange for her to say so much in one go. "I take it you enjoy reading?" she asked with an encouraging smile. Perhaps the quiet girl would talk more if the conversation was steered more towards her interests. It would certainly liven up the stifling atmosphere. It probably wouldn't hurt to perhaps get on the good side of her guard either. Fuck. Ugh. Hold on, I'm sorry. You gotta give me a moment here. Yes, I do. The darker-haired girl answered again in that slow, methodical voice of hers. They are a quiet pastime, and reading is a good escape from reality. Literature is certainly a commendable hobby, Weiss said complimentingly. I admit to enjoying a good book every now and then myself. A wry grin adored her face. One of the fine arts, she whispered. Something worthy enough for the Schnee heiress herself to spend her time on. A sigh was let out before she recomposed herself with a bit of a happier smile. Luckily, as far as the fine arts go, I am rather fond of music as well as dance. How about you? The two girls continued on like that into the night. They spoke of small and inconsequential things, their soft smiles and words temporarily masking the true nature of their situation. If not for the change, they could have been mistaken for two regular friends. As it was over the course of the next couple days, it was rather surprising how quickly and easily Captor and Captain developed a seemingly amicable relationship. Or that's what she thought. Stockholm syndrome. Oh man. Beginning of the summer, my nose is like this. It was a couple of days later that Blake came in a tad more somber than usual. Weiss seemed to note this, but declined to comment on it. The heiress was a lot calmer and less belligerent than she would have expected, given her personality profile from the files she had received. Perhaps she just knew that acting out would get her anywhere here. Although Blake had not overstepped any boundaries, it was still clear that the suggestiveness of the two of them being alone in a room where she was chained to a bed made her quite uncomfortable and wary. As time passed, while she still remained captive without being released, the girl seemed to become more and more subdued and disheartened. Despite the situation, it was a strange sort of semi-relationship friendship they had struck up. They chatted a little every day. There wasn't a whole lot else to do in that room. On occasion, Blake would read aloud for her from her book. She wasn't allowed to give her any books, a security precaution. Nothing other than food was to be given to the prisoner. It was nice, actually, having someone to talk to for once. Strange as the situation may be. Oh man, I agree with you, Blake, on that. Adam wasn't particularly talkative, and she interacted little with others of the organization. Blake wondered what it said about the two of them that they found companionship between prisoner and prison guard. It was several hours later in the afternoon when Blake finally approached the topic. The negotiations have not been going well, as I have been informed. She paused to look at Weiss, seeing that she had the snow-haired girl's full attention. Your father has not been very cooperative in working towards your release. I was told to ask you why this is. I see, Weiss said after a moment with a crestfallen expression. I can't even say that I'm terribly surprised, she admitted in a whisper after a moment. Blake noted that she actually did not sound surprised at all. She didn't even sound sad exactly. Or at least it was not the dominating element of her voice. Perhaps more resigned than anything else. Disappointed or even crushed, as if she were expecting this but hoping against it. Blake was befuddled. But why? She questioned her. He is your father, is he not? And you are his heir. Your safety should be paramount. Yet that doesn't seem to be the case. His heir. The other girl whispered bitterly with her face downcast. I am indeed his heir, and so that is all I am to him. He stopped being my father a long time ago. As she trailed off, the sadness leaked more and more into her voice. There was something brittle in her stance and expression, as if she might shatter at the slightest prompting. Seeing the other girl upset hurt Blake more than she thought it would. However, while they got along well enough, in the end she had still helped kidnap Weiss, and was now her guard keeping her captive. Doing this was her job, and she shouldn't be getting attached to the prisoner. Hardening herself as she pressed on. Hardening herself, she passed on. What do you mean by that? Even if your personal relationship is strained, you are still the heir, as you say. Blake began to infer. As the heirs to the company, should he not be trying to get you back? Why doesn't he seem to care? Ha! A bitter laugh. That man cares for nothing other than himself and his work. While you would think that to mean that he would care for the company, he really doesn't. After he dies, what does he care what becomes of what is left behind? What use is an heir? I am but an afterthought at best. As Weiss explains the reason for her father's actions, her expression slowly becomes more downcast. Why? Why is that? Blake's question was presented hesitantly at best. Weiss was being surprisingly forthcoming with her answers, despite how obviously painful this was for her. A tremor ran through Weiss's body, causing the chains to let out soft clinks. Mother, came the soft whisper as the heiress's voice hitched slightly at the end. After she died, he changed. He stopped really living. It's a wonder what he finds the will to get up in the mornings. A sniffle came as Blake realized that the other girl now had a trail of tears running down her face. She had evidently hit a sore topic. He stopped being a father then. All he does is work, and even that is cold and empty. She turned to Blake, heartbroken expression on her face. Once upon a time, I used to be Daddy's little girl, you know. Even after he changed, I held on to some hope. But I see now I've been cast away. Useless. Worthless. Unwanted. Slowly, Blake stood from her chair near the exit. Moving from her position, she slowly approached the bed with Weiss on it for the first time, outside delivering or picking up trays of food. Sitting herself lightly on the bed next to the chained girl, she placed an arm across the crying girl's back. She wasn't supposed to be within reach of the prisoner, just as a safety precaution. But looking at her now, Blake didn't think she had anything to worry about. Unfortunately, she was unused to having to comfort someone. and her uncomfortableness with the situation showed on her face. Still, Weiss seemed to take some measure of comfort in her presence, as her posture relaxed a little, I mean. I had hoped that he would come for me, a teary-eyed Weiss confessed. Everything I've done was to try and show my worth, she whispered miserably. That his daughter was something. A bitter chuckle. I've been a fool. Blake had no idea what she could say to any of that. Silently, she wrapped her arms around Weiss in an awkward hug, hoping that she could at least provide some physical comfort, even if she wasn't very good with words. Stroking Weiss's back, she could feel the tremors in the other girl's body each time she sniffled or hiccuped. Weiss's voice came softly, a quiet breath next to Blake's ear. You know, it's funny. I never had anybody I've been close to growing up. You're the closest thing I have to a friend. It wasn't something that Blake could see from her position, but a sad little smile was upon Weiss's face. How sad is it that someone I've known for less than a week, that kidnapped me, that has me in chains, is probably my best friend. Each word Weiss spoke struck deeply at Blake. Biting her lip, she was glad that her face wasn't visible to the other girl. It seemed that she had greatly misjudged her initially. Even those who had the fortune to be born to a high-class family didn't necessarily lead a charmed life. Because of her, what little stability Weiss had in her life was now crashing down around her. And yet, she considered her her best friend. How ironic. The worst thing was that Blake wasn't totally sure that feeling was not reciprocated, I mean. Clutching her friend closer to Blake found that it was... Clutching her friend closer to her, Blake found that it was she herself who was now finding comfort from the other girl. She had never been a fan of this plan from the beginning, but now it was so much worse. She wondered what would become of the heiress now. Adam will never just let her go as simply as that, and her father was completely unwilling to negotiate. Blake had gone along with Adam's scheme initially to strike a blow with the Shanitas company. They were a major contributor towards the oppression of Fauna, and she had justified their action by telling herself that they had a long time coming. But now, holding Weiss, she had to wonder, after so long, had she finally become the monster of the story? Man, Jesus Christ. I fucking love this story, guys. Seriously. It is truly a classic of the fanfiction community. Though it makes me sad as to what the fanfiction community has become in terms of RWBY. Sorry to be a downer. Sorry. Let's just keep going. Weiss did not even realize she had fallen asleep until she woke up. Shifting slightly, the jangling of her chains accompanied her movements. She must have only just nodded off for a short while as Blake was still here with her. The warmth of her body was both comforting as well as rather disquieting. She had been entirely honest when she had said that Blake was her best and really only friend. She had never shown so much emotion to anyone else before, and to be honest, she felt it rather shameful to have broken down like that. But her father now having abandoned her to her fate by all appearances, Blake was really the only thing she really had. How pitiful must she be, where her only friend is also her guard and captor. It was perhaps because she felt so close to Blake for some indeterminate reason that she had said as much as she had. She was feeling very miserable right now, to put it blandly, and she was perhaps also in a bit of a shock. Her life had more or less been entirely pulled out from underneath her feet. Taken from her home, she was now shackled and under guard, all in less than a week. Her hopes of her father negotiating her release were shattered, and with them any illusion that he still cared for her. Blake gently pulling away from her brought Weiss out of her thoughts. You asked me before why it is that I do what I do, why I chose not to hide what I am, Blake whispered quietly,
Bringing her hands to her chest, she unbuttoned her vest and shrugged it off. Oh shit! Nudity! I'm kidding. Weiss reached for the hem of her white undershirt. Weiss reacted, backpedaling as fast as she could. She pushed herself away from the undressing girl with a strangled cry, almost leaping backwards off the bed. With her mental and emotional state as shaken as they were, she had moved off sheer instinct and immediate panic. The rattle of the chain sounded loudly until she reached her limit, pulling them taut, which also elicited a whimper from her. "What are you doing?" Weiss demanded shakily, with her eyes wild. The other girl had paused in her undressing upon Weiss's sudden movements, and a pair of amber eyes was now looking at her in surprise. A flicker of understanding passed through them as Blake's expression changed to vaguely horrified recognition. I wouldn't. Blake started off, stammering. Swallowing and recomposing herself, she continued. I mean, you don't have to worry. I wouldn't do something like that. Weiss's face flushed slightly as she immediately felt bad for thinking such a thing of Blake. When she had first seen the dark-haired girl, one of the things she had felt was relief, as having a female guard as opposed to a male one would hopefully mean that certain unsavory and reprehensible actions would not occur. But when Blake had started undressing, her mind had immediately assumed the worst. Still, she supposed that she could give her the benefit of the doubt. Waringly, Weiss returned closer to the bed, the chains going slack with a jangle, but she maintained a bit of distance still. Seeing that the white-haired captive had calmed down a bit, Blake pulled off her shirt, revealing her top clad only in the bra. With a shaky breath of her own, she turned around and bared her back to Weiss. A soft gasp sounded as Weiss's eyes went wide once more. What? She breathed out softly, struck speechless. Weiss's frozen blue eyes were stuck on Blake's back, or rather what was on her back. The sight which had Weiss so transfixed was the multitude of terrible scars that adorned the pale flesh of the other girl. They were varied in type, appearance, and size, no two looking the same. Some were thick and ropey, raised ridges of skin crisscrossing their way through each other. Others existed just as leons of discolored skin, some darker, some white. Angry-looking patches rather than lines existed as well, looking like the remnants of burns. The only thing in common between them was that they were all faded, simply reminders of the past rather than a recent occurrence. Even if I can hide what I am from everyone else, I can't hide from myself, Blake explained in that calm voice of hers. Still with her back to Weiss, she continued talking. It is not something I can just forget. These are part of what I am, what made me who I am today. The soft jangling of the chains sounded through the small room as Weiss walked back towards Blake in the bed. Seating herself at its edge, she reached out hesitantly. Long alabaster fingers brushed across a particularly bad scar, drawing a slight shiver through Blake's body. What happened? How did you get all of these? The emotion in her voice was not quite pity. She didn't think Blake would want that. Just sadness and empathy. Because no matter how human I look, it doesn't matter if somebody already knows. Blake closed her eyes, bowing her head. After my parents were gone, there was nobody left to protect me. The people of the town knew what I was, what I am. They barely tolerated my presence as it was. Nobody cared if I got a little banged up. A little banged up was understating it. A little banged up was understating it. Weiss privately thought to herself. She didn't understand how Blake was able to talk about this so calmly when she felt like she was about to cry. I do what I do because I never want anybody else to have to go through that. To feel like a monster. Whether it be the monster they were labeled or... A sardonic expression crossed the half-honest face as she finished her sentence. The monster that I had become. It took but the shortest of moments before Weiss made up her mind as to her next action. Wrapping her arms around Blake as best she could with the chains restricting her movements, she embraced the melancholic from behind, trying to comfort it now as Blake did for her earlier. Laying her head on a pale, unmarred shoulder, she buried her face into the mane of black hair from the side.
Speaking softly, she murmured her next words, just loud enough for Blake to hear. That's a nice dream. The implied forgiveness went unspoken, but understood. With Blake's face not being visible to her from her current position, what happened next went unknown to her. A single tear trailed down from a golden eye as an expression of utmost self-loathing twisted across her features. Weiss wouldn't know it, but her forgiveness only caused Blake's self-hatred to increase and her guilt to grow. Wow, where are we at, actually? Oh, okay, we're more than halfway done. Man. I actually did a scene like this in the Blackening Rose, actually. It's more like taking inspiration from it, or just like taking it and making it my own in some way. Because in the Blackening Rose, what the others didn't know was that Weiss's father actually abused her. And, well, there were scars to show for that. So when Blake was captured in some underground lab that Weiss's father had, that was the reason why even RWBY had the ability to turn into a Beowulf. Weiss just told her the truth so that she could understand why she did it, or why she started to go against her father after so long, or why she couldn't go against her father. That felt like one of the most... I felt like that was one of the best works of development I've ever had in a character. I'm not sure about Red Snowflakes, to be honest, which is my most recent work. I don't know about that one. But I keep remembering the Blackening Rose and how I did some things. It was definitely the first time I ever wrote so much for a story. So it was a pretty special story to me. Alright. Blake sighed as she trudged back towards the cell. Another few days had passed while Adam was looking into alternatives for what to do with Weiss. Apparently, a group was now expressing interest in purchasing the heiress for some use or another. She was never in great support of the kidnapping to begin with, but now, selling her off to some shady-looking guys, it did not sit well with her at all. Oh, fuck, we're at this point now. Shit. Ever since that night, Weiss had generally been in even more of a depressed state than even before. Blake felt bad for her, really. It could not have been easy to realize that the only family you had did not care for you in the slightest. Furthermore, Blake's own impulsive decision to show Weiss her scars and tell her a bit about her past seemed to depress the other girl even more. But Adam was the one who had saved her so long ago. She owed him everything. When it comes down to it, she had only known Weiss for a week at best. And so, however grudgingly, she continued to follow Adam's directives. At a moment, a representative from the organization was in their hideout to help hash out details and inspect the prisoner. Oh no! I forgot this part. Blake had been sent to run an errand earlier while Adam spoke with them. Now that she had returned, Adam was going out instead. With nothing else to do, she figured that she may as well go and see Weiss one last time. Stepping into the darkened intermediary room, she turned around to close the door behind her. In the darkened room, the only light was that coming from the window into the room beyond. As she passed by the window, she glanced in, expecting to see Weiss waiting on her bed as usual. That was not what she saw. That brute they had sent over to talk with Adam was in the room with her. Worse than that, he was in fact on top of her, pinning her to the bed. Though no sound made it out of the room, it was obvious what was happening for Weiss is struggling. Practically tearing the door off its hinges, Blake raced into the room. Grabbing the large man by the shoulder, the snarling half-fauna threw him off the chained and struggling girl with inhuman strength. Ripping the blade of camel shroud free from the sheath, she pointed the tip right in the thug's face. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed with obvious fury in her voice. "Whoa, girlie, relax," he replied as he raised his hands in the air. "I was just checking out the merchandise. That's all. Standing back up, he made sure to keep his hands raised as he eyed the blade pointed at him warily. As he was backing away slowly towards the exit, Blake made sure to keep the tip of her blade pointed at his neck as she glared at him with narrowed golden eyes. "Get out!" As he continued his retreat to the door in compliance with Blake's demand, the nameless thug continued speaking. "The exchange is happening tomorrow. Make sure the girl is ready." She noted his words internally, but on the outside she simply retreated her order with a hiss. "Get out, now!" The man finally, having reached the door, wasted no time in beating a hasty retreat out of it. Once he was gone, Blake immediately banished him from her mind as she sheathed Gamel's shroud and turned back towards Weiss. "Weiss, are you okay?" She called out worriedly as she rushed to her side. Grasping her lightly by the shoulder, she tried to look into Weiss's eyes, but the other girl kept her face downturned. He didn't touch you, did he?" Blake had to make sure, but was hesitant in the wording. A silent shake of the head was her answer. Pulling back slightly, she looked downward to examine the shaking girl. Both her clothing and hair were disheveled, but Weiss had remained fully clothed. She had probably arrived just in time. Pulling Weiss into another embrace, she had the brief thought that this becoming something of a regular thing for them. Even as Weiss remained silent, she was able to feel the trembles that ran through the girl's body, as well as the tears that leaped onto her shoulder. Although Blake had intervened before they had gone too far, it must have been a terrible and frightening experience for Weiss. As the Schnee heiress, it would have been rare for anybody other than her father to hold power over her, and he barely acknowledged her existence as it was. Here, chained to the bed, she had become more subdued, frightened at the prospect of her own helplessness. But Blake had never taken advantage of her state. Not like that scum who had just tried. Blake continued holding Weiss for hours, well into the night. The two went without dinner as neither welcomed the prospect of leaving Weiss alone in the room. As Weiss fell asleep, Blake finally came to a decision. She couldn't do this anymore. It no longer mattered what Adam wanted. Not if something like that was what Weiss had to look forward to. Where darkness fell and Weiss was asleep, Blake made her move. She made a quick sweep of the hideout to make sure it was empty. Adam was still out, and as a smaller base, very few other members of their organization ever came here. At this time of night, nobody was here but her and Weiss. She didn't really need to take anything with her. She knew the locations of a few supply dead drops she could reach later. The only thing that she had to take care of was Weiss. Having grabbed the keys to her chain, she brought them back to the room and quietly unlocked the manacles attached to each of the heiress's limbs. Blake didn't bother waking her up as she wasn't quite sure how effective Weiss would be at moving fast after such a long period of inactivity. It was fine if she were asleep. The half-fauna was more than strong enough to carry the petite girl. Even after all of this, she didn't think the heiresses probably would allow her to be carried to safety once the opportunity for escape presented itself. Still, better to be safe than sorry. Grabbing Weiss's boots from next to the bed, she carefully slipped them on to the sleeping girl's feet. As she took one more quick look around the base, Blake bit her lip as she did one final thing. A message was left behind, addressed to Adam. Goodbye. Slipping out of the door, Blake paused to readjust the position of Weiss on her back. Once she was satisfied with a quick scan of her surroundings, she dashed forward. Winding her way through the narrow streets, Blake moved with great familiarity, taking care to use the back alleys to lessen the possibility of someone spotting them. The inky black of her hair and clothing meshed in well with the darkness, making it extremely hard for anyone to notice her. Despite all this, however, it was only a couple minutes later that Blake felt the presence of someone tailing her. Each time she turned around, she would catch the flicker of somebody ducking around a corner, or a shadow that stuck too far out. She couldn't believe that she had been found out already. It wasn't Adam. If he had seen her message, he would not be beating around the bush like this. However it couldn't be good news. Compounding the problem, she felt Weiss stirring into wakefulness on her back. Dashing around the corner, she carefully lowered Weiss to the ground and turned around to face her. Shh, shushed Blake as she raised a finger to her lips. Weiss was alarmed at the situation, of the sudden change of scenery upon waking, as well as her now freed limbs, but she seemed willing to hear Blake out for this moment, which she was thankful for. There isn't much time to explain, she whispered urgently, but you have to go. Get somewhere safe. Run and don't come back. Go, now. Her voice rose to a near shout towards the end as she ushered Weiss away towards the other end of the alley. Not stopping the questioner, Weiss accepted her commands in her groggy, half-woken state as she began running. As Blake saw her pause for a moment to look back, she felt the first drop of rain fall upon her face. Once Weiss had exited the mouth of the alley and disappeared from her sight, she turned her back around the corner, the rain now falling freely. Blake called out as she brought Gamel Stroud off her back. I know you're there. You may as well show yourself. A moment of silence passed by before a figure stepped out and called out in a familiar voice. Well, well, it's a good thing we were keeping watch. Or the Schnee-girl may have slipped away with nobody the wiser. You! Blake hissed venomously in recognition. It was the same bastard who had tried to force himself onto Weiss. The exchange was set for tomorrow. What are you doing here now? Oh, we never intended to go through with the deal that was set out, he said, with his voice smug now that there wasn't a blade to his throat unlike earlier. And it seems neither were you as well. Oh well, this just works out so much for the better of us. You've done us the favor of moving around the base of yours and saved us the trouble of having to break in. And what makes you think I will just allow you to get past me to get her? Blake threatened as she leveled the Gamel Shroud at him. Although she was quite good at it, she typically abhorred fighting unless necessary. In this case, though, against this man, Blake thinks that she will quite enjoy this fight indeed. The look on her face attested as well to that promise of great violence. Simple. He raised his hand with the thumb resting on his middle finger. Them. Snap. Before Blake had a moment to question what he meant, two more sheeps appeared and rushed towards her. Bracing the flat of the sword with her left hand, Blake blocked the first strike of her new opponent before jumping back. Taking a ready stand, she took quick stock of the two new combatants. Amber eyes narrowed at the sight. Oh man, I remember this shit. AK-130 androids, heavily modified. It seemed they were opting for blades rather than their guns. Haha, stupid mistake. Probably to keep the noise down and avoid drawing attention. Okay, that's pretty smart, actually. That was fine with her, but it also meant that she couldn't shoot either. She didn't know how people like them managed to get their hands on the droids, but it was no matter. The narrowness of the alley may restrict their movements with the ribbon on Gamel Shroud, but it worked against them as well with their greater numbers. Throwing Gamel Shroud forward at the first robot by the ribbon, she forced it to deflect the shot. As this was happening, though, Blake dashed forward, grabbing the handle of her weapon out of the air for a quick second blow, knocking aside its guard and sending it reeling back. She was quickly forced, however, to take off the sheath into her other hand, using it to deflect the attack of the second droid before she was able to finish off the first. The first opponent, having turned its forward to regain its balance, was now surging forward at her in an attempt to shoulder check her down. Leaping off the ground, Blake placed a hand on its shoulder as it neared her, wheeling over it as she kicked off the back of its head, pushing it to the ground as she charged at the thug who was now brandishing a sword of his own. The punk went down easier than she expected. He managed to block the first blade, but he failed to reorient his guard before the sheath swung it after. The second blow knocked the sword out of his grasp, and twirling around in a spin, the back of the blade came in at his head, contacting with a satisfying crack. Yeah! Yeah! This took perhaps 2 seconds altogether to take him down. As he slumped to the ground unconscious, Blake had to quickly dodge to the side away from the bladed edge swung by one of the androids, which were now at her back. Having overextended too far, it was far too late in reacting to Blake's counterattack. A quick strike to knock aside its arm, followed by a spin back to the side, put her in front of it once more. Okay. And a swing from the sheath scored a line up its torso as its head was forced back from the force of the blow. Having readied the blade once more, Blake rammed it through its chest, causing a shower of sparks, as the lights went out throughout its body. The other AK-130 had since brought itself back to its feet and was now heading in her direction. It never had a chance to attack, though, as the body of its comrade was thrown into it, knocking them both back to the floor. This was followed up quickly by the blade of Gamel Shroud being forcefully rammed through the back of both of them. A swipe of the sharpened edge of the sheath quickly took off its head as well. Standing up, Blake took a shuddering breath as the tension left her body. Sparing a glance to ensure that the brute was still slumped over on the ground, she turned her eyes skyward. The rain was really starting to come down now. She could feel it soaking into her clothes and skin. She wondered where she would go from here. Freeing Weiss had been a split-second decision, but because there was no way she could return to her old life now. It's not like she could follow after her either, not since she helped kidnap her in the first place. Putting aside her thoughts for the moment, Blake turned to depart the alley in the direction opposite to where they had all come in. She had barely made it more than a dozen steps before it happened. A surge ran through the half-fauna's body as the muscles in her body seized up. Golden eyes widened as her mouth opened in a silent scream before she fell forward onto the ground. Well, well, came the mocking tone as he repeated his earlier words. It looks like the tables have turned. I love that fucking quote. A rough hand grabbed her by the shoulder as she was thrown up against the wall into a slumped sitting position. She heard the crackle first before she managed to bring her eyes to see the shine of the taser in the darkness of the alley. It certainly wasn't any kind of standard taser. The power it packed would be potentially lethal to most people. The fact that she was soaked from the rain likely had not helped matters either. Putting a hand on her chin, Blake's face was roughly turned to face him as she glared balefully. You know, you're quite the looker yourself, girl. The thug mused aloud as he inspected her face. Maybe I'll have a little fun with you before I go and hunt down that other pretty little thing. Although she had yet to get the control over herself necessary to do much else, Blake managed to spit in his eye. This was quickly proved to be a poor decision as the backhand she received caused her to spit blood as the inside of her cheek was split. Hearing the sound of something being picked up off the ground, Blake managed to force her head back into position to look at the man. She was faced with the blade of her own camel shroud being pointed right at her face. You will pay for that. And after I'm done with you, I will go find that Schnee girl and show her your corpse, he said coldly. Blake struggled to move, but the effects of the overpowered taser were still apparent. Her fingers twitched, her legs slowly slid across the ground, and her neck twisted from side to side. But she could do nothing useful to get her out of this situation. Staring back at her own blade, she decided to lick her end face on. Blood splattered the ground and stained Blake's clothes. Oh, man, I fucking love that cliffhanger right there. And then the next perspective. Oh, my God. I miss BlackenedHearts. They haven't been active for a very long time. Actually, a lot of writers that have been here since 2013, since the show started, have not been around. Well, there are some I'm actually fine with, but there's some that haven't been active as much anymore, or have completely gave up on the fandom. A lot of them have really good reasons. I'll get into that more at the end. Weiss had no idea what was happening when she came to. She had not seen outside her cell since she had first been taken and placed into it, nor were her chains ever removed. The first thing she had seen when she had awoken was Blake. With the shocked state she found herself in and the urgency of Blake's voice, she had thought to question her instructions. That she had a moment to think, though, she thought that she could probably guess as to what the current situation was. She was outside now, and nobody was watching or following her as she ran. Providing she wasn't caught again, she was essentially free and in the clear. Blake, however, was with her when she had awoken, and she had embarked to restrain her. In fact, she was the one who told Weiss to run. Oh, God, I'm having hiccups now. The urgency in her voice and the movement she made towards the weapon on her back also suggested that somebody else was after them. Perhaps herself in particular, since Blake had sent her away while she stayed behind. The conclusion was that Blake had freed her for some reason, and now either her associates or the group that man from yesterday was after them now. She wanted to run to get somewhere safe and get back in contact with the Shanid state. She really did. Freedom was within her grasp, and she felt a lot more in control of her situation than she had in what seemed like a long time. There was no reason for her to go back. Even if Blake had freed her, she was also one of the ones who kidnapped her originally and held her under lock and key. But Weiss had barely made it a block away before she stopped, barely noting that the rain coming down had now begun to soak into her dress. The truth was, everything she had said to the raven-haired girl was true. Blake really was her closest friend, as sad as that may be. And what did she really have to return to? With a mother curse, Weiss turned around and sprinted back to where she left Blake. Circling around the building, she made to enter the alley from behind. Hopefully she would arrive to see nothing but an empty alleyway, or perhaps Blake after having won a fight. As long as Blake was fine, then she hoped that she would be able to leave with a clean conscience. Her footsteps as she stepped into the alley were masked by the sound of the rain hitting pavement. The scene she came across made her blood run cold. Blake was slumped along the wall, almost unmoving but for her head and the twitching of her extremities. The cretin from earlier was there as well, pointing her own weapon at her. Weiss's next few actions were a blur as she moved without thinking. Running forward, she snatched a fallen blade off the ground. Another short dash later, the sound of flesh tearing sounded as the blade ran through the back of the thug, erupting out of his chest in a spray of crimson. Blood splattered the ground and stained Blake's clothes. Blake's weapon was lowered to the side as the man was now staring at his own blade coming out of his torso, stained in blood. He choked and gurgled as his lungs began to fill with blood. Another jerk of the short sword from Weiss pulled it in deeper, causing his grip to slacken as Gamel Shroud fell to the ground. As she let go of the weapon and stepped back, the dying man sank to his knees, mind numb. Weiss still managed to reach forward in time and push him to the side so he wouldn't fall forward into the blade into Blake. That's actually a really good detail right there. Bringing her hands into her sight, she knew that they were shaking. She couldn't feel anything at all. A sound from Blake snapped her out of her shock as the air pushed up everything else to the back of her mind. Stepping over the body, she kneeled down next to Blake, who was now showing signs of movement. Are you okay? She hated the tremor in her voice, but something about seeing Blake like this shook her. You came back. Blake managed to stutter out with some difficulty as she regained control of her body. Taking a shaky breath, she took a moment to clear her throat and shake loose the static in her mind as a mane of black hair swished through the air. Why? Because as I've already told you, you're my friend, my best friend, Weiss whispered softly in return. Because I have nothing else. My father never even cared that I was gone. I have no other friends, no other family. All I have is you. Saying it out loud, admitting everything. She thought it would be painful. If anything, it was in fact somewhat the opposite. Cathartic and freeing. Blake watched her for a moment, once more, giving that careful, considering look of hers. Thank you. Grimacing, Blake placed her hand on the ground and attempted to force herself into a standing position. Seeing her struggles, Blake went to her side and slung an arm over her shoulders, trying to help her stand. We should get going soon. Fast. Someone will come looking soon, Blake said urgently. Weakened as Weiss's own body was from her short time in imprisonment, she managed to help Blake hobble out of the alley as they made some distance. As the minutes passed, Blake began to regain her strength, and eventually it was her who was supporting Weiss as they moved. Their escape from the scene of the crime helped keep her mind off of what she had done. Eventually, though, they came to a stop. The two had moved onto the rooftops as soon as Blake felt she was capable of it, feeling that it was better than staying in the streets. When Weiss had almost collapsed, though, Blake had forced her to stop for a break. Once more, she was left to her thoughts, and the reality of what she had just done began to sink in as she trembled in Blake's arms. Weiss trembled as the rain washed over them. Pressed tight to the body of the taller girl, she continued shaking. She felt Blake stroking her back as she whispered into her ear, trying to calm her down. Weiss barely heard her words, though. Her mind struck on what she had just done. She had just killed a man. The blade had ripped right through his chest, and there was so much blood. Even if he had gotten immediate medical attention, his chances of survival would not have been great. But left alone and bleeding out in the alley, he had no chance at all. She had fought before, of course. Murder Naster was not just for show. She had killed. What person wanting to be a huntress had not killed a monster at some point? But sparring with someone or killing monsters was not the same thing. Not the same as killing a human being. Not the same as killing another person. She felt Blake's hand move to grasp her shoulders, pulling her back slightly. Weiss, look at me, Blake said firmly. Shakily, she turned her head upwards from Blake's chest to do as she said. It wasn't your fault, she murmured softly. It was him or us. And while I'm no saint, he certainly wasn't a good person at all either. Not with who he associates with. Not with what he was planning to do. To you and to me. Weiss knew that on some level, intellectually at least, if it had to be him or one of them that went down, she'd rather it be him. But still knowing and feeling were two entirely separate things. At this point, her tears were mixed in with the rain washing down her cheeks. As her shaking intensified and panic began to set in, she felt Blake's hand upon her chin turned her face forward. Her eyes widened as she saw the other girl's face right in front of her eyes as a pair of lips came to cover her own. If she had been thinking rationally, Weiss would have been surprised at how quickly she kissed back. Closing her eyes, she brought her arms over Blake's shoulder as the other girl pulled their bodies together with an impressive strength. The kiss was desperate, needy. Their lips crashed together repeatedly with barely a moment pause for air in between. When Blake's tongue pressed into her mouth, she could taste the other girl's blood. But she didn't care. She didn't care about the consequences right now, what this meant. She just knew that she needed this. The thought hadn't crossed her mind before, but when she was holding the pet-type girl, something clicked in her mind. Weiss was hurting right now and she wanted to make it better. As her hand knotted itself into Weiss's snowy hair, she continued pressing her lips against the softer pair they found themselves on. As her tongue pushed forward relentlessly, she was delighted to find that Weiss's own silky tongue was wrestling her back. But even as the passion overtook her, Blake's mind continued working. This was wrong. Blake knew that. Firstly, they were both girls. And while their society may not judge it as harshly as some others she had heard of, it was still typically considered a taboo, especially for someone in Weiss's position. Second, the cold, hard truth was that Weiss had been her prisoner. She was abducted and held against her will, with Blake acting as her guard. At some point, Blake had fallen for Weiss in the time they spent together. Time in which Weiss was bound and unable to move. Weiss as well may have developed some sort of feelings for her in return. But what were they really? Some form of twisted Stockholm syndrome? Third, their stations in life were entirely different. Weiss, the heiress to one of the most influential companies in the world, and she, what essentially amounted to a common terrorist and a dirty half-breed. Here the two of them were now desperately clinging to each other, soaked in the rain. Splatters of blood still clung to her, some of it having rubbed onto Weiss. The rain failed to do anything more than cause it to run and smear more. Weiss was shaking, and not all of it from the cold. Blake's body, meanwhile, felt frozen stiff, as if she were as solid as ice. This was hardly the most romantic of scenes. Everything Blake knew said that this was wrong, and yet holding Weiss's frail frame in her arms, finding warmth in her form, something about it just felt so right. Another thing Blake knew was that she could be selfish. She didn't have many things, and what little she did have, she clung to jealousy. Right or wrong, at some point this Weiss had taken her heart. And the very same girl was hers now as well. She knew that the best thing to do for her was to return her home and leave, never to see her again. Because really, someone like her would be able to make Weiss happy. And yet this was something that she knew she would not let go of for anything. Pulling back from the kiss, she rested her forehead against Weiss's, against that of the girl she loved. She would make this work. Somehow, some way, whatever it took. She finally had something worth living for, something worth fighting for. And she would not let go of it. So, even now, the story is very dear to me. It really is. I was only 13 when I read this. And yes, the mature themes would probably make you guys say, well, why the fuck did you read this? You were too young to read that. But really, who gives a shit? It's not like I played rated M games that had sexual themes or anything like that. To be honest, it's kind of hard to actually like put a filter or some sort of restriction on someone that has access to these things. This is the internet, after all. Someone could just easily fake their birth date. Pretty much. To be able to access, mature rated stuff. But even then, I'm kind of glad that I was smart enough to not care about the rating, to not care about the sexual themes in the story, because all I cared about with this story was just how fucking good, how very well written it was. And to be honest, for a long time, I actually read this. I read this years ago, and long ago, I remember thinking about making a sort of continuation to this story. But then I realized that why should I do such a thing? Because this was so perfect on its own. Well, not for me at least. It was an amazing ending. But for me, I'm the kind of person that's like, oh man, I wish they kept going. I wish there was an aftermath. That sort of stuff. But it was better just to leave it alone. Plus, I would need permission to continue with this story or anything like that. But BlackenedHearts hasn't really been around, so there's no way I can actually ask for permission from the author. So I don't think I'm going to touch it at all. It just seems perfect the way it is. But yeah. Back in 2013, there were some of us who were just barely starting out with writing fan fiction. There was me, and there were some of my friends, Noble Mita, Ghost Phoenix 113, Phoenix Commander, and then the other guys that I would know later in a group that I'm in known as Legion 205, which consists of them, Shadow Nightblade, Angel 625, Burning Peace, Tototail, Martuna Major, and Silver Lining. There's a lot more than that. Well, there's a few more that I didn't say, but it would take me a while to say them all. But pretty much, it's just, this was one of the stories that helped me get into writing fan fiction. And it still holds a place in my mind. Sometimes I would go back and read this, and I haven't read it for years, and I kind of regret doing that. Because it's such a great story. It's such a great example of one of those stories that were just so well written in the RWBY fandom. And don't get me wrong, don't get me wrong here. There are amazing fanfics. Even back then, there was just masterpiece after masterpiece coming out. I mean, there was Tear of Life. There was Momox Toshiro, even though I don't really agree with what she does with her Patreon. Cody Knight or D-Syncs, but I don't really care much for him anymore. He's kind of turned into an asshole. And then the guys that I know now, that I'm friends with, that would come later after me. It felt like the start of something that I felt really involved in, that I helped kind of shape. Even if I was just a tiny bit late. But I was like in the very early days, if you think about it now. I was in the RWBY fandom in the first 500 fanfics that came out. And it felt great. Because it was the start of something. And now we're like a couple thousand fanfics strong. But now we get to this point where we have 4 volumes of RWBY now. I'm 17 now, not 13 anymore. And so much has changed. And I know I talked about this in one of my earlier vlogs that I did recently. But it's kind of hard not to think about it. Because now there's just so many fanfics that include like so many different ships. And then there are those that are there that, well, I don't know what to really think of them. With every community comes a sort of cancerous habit from it. And RWBY is no different. It's no different at all. And it's kind of discouraged me from writing so much. Well, other than my AV teacher at my high school. But even then, I don't want to stop writing. And reading this fanfic again, remembering why it was one of my most favorite inspirations to getting into writing RWBY fan fiction. I just want to write again, and maybe I might actually narrate a story of my own eventually. Because why not? Though, if some of you guys have not started writing and are considering writing it, I will say that no matter what people say in their reviews, and I know I kind of shitted on some of the other people that are well known in the fandom, Destinction Momotoshiro, or Hanasaku Shijun, or Hana as I know her. Even though I kind of shat on them because of how they are in terms of their personality, their stories are great. Well, for the most part. But yeah. But just remember that be aware of what you're writing, because the one thing I see so many people doing nowadays, and it disheartens me to see this, there is sometimes just no fucking soul in the fanfic. And that just makes me bitter. Because in the past 4 years of writing, every word, every moment has been just the time that I used to think, the time that I used to sit back after writing a certain moment in a story and shedding tears or feeling happy for the characters. Because at the end of the day, you want to be satisfied with what you're writing. You want to feel that there is something genuine in it. Not something fake. Not something forced. Which is one of the problems with commissions nowadays too. That's why I kind of called out Momoto Shiro in that regard. She may write well, but quality's dropping off because of how much she writes constantly. She doesn't really take her time as much. I kind of miss her old stuff. I kind of miss everyone's old stuff. But times change. And that's something I agree with, even if it doesn't sound like it. Anyways, sorry to be a bit disheartening right there, or a bit weird. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one shot, because holy mother of shit, it just feels great to just read again. I still don't know what I'm going to be reading in terms of a multi-chapter story. Maybe I might actually just read something of my own. Maybe I'll find something. I just don't know yet, because right now I'm thinking a little bit more deeply on what I want to read next. So I'll come up with an update soon on what we're going to be reading, or you'll just end up seeing the first part of what is going to be a multi-chapter narration, or maybe another one-shot. So I'll see you guys later. As always, stay classy. Have a great summer, guys.